Hello, my friends. My name is Nilesh. Welcome to this channel. In the previous video, we saw how to use two of the power tools for Kubernetes command line, the kubectl, which is kubectx and kubeNS. In this video, we are going to see how to use the plugin manager for kubectl. If you're working with Kubernetes, you might be already using kubectl, which is a command line interface to interact with a Kubernetes cluster. And if you've used any of the IDEs like Visual Studio, IntelliJ, or Eclipse, you are already aware that these IDEs they come up with something called as plugins. So these plugins they allow us to extend the functionalities or features provided by the IDEs. But when we work with a command line tool, we have a very limited scope of working with the command line. And Kubernetes being very popular, not all features are provided by default, or there is a lot of scope for improving the feature set of Kubernetes. kubectl is quite popular. It's one of the most commonly used tool to interact with Kubernetes. And in this video, we are going to see how we can extend the functionality of kubectl using something called as Krew, which is a plugin manager. Plugin manager is, again, if you work with something like, or if you're on Windows, Homebrew is a package manager for Mac. If you're working with Linux, you might have used apt-get, which allows us to manage packages and their dependencies. And same way, if you're on Windows, I'm a big fan of Chocolatey. Now, Windows comes with a default package manager or a built-in package manager called as winget. So these package managers, they help us to manage the installation of software, their upgrades, their uninstallation. So instead of going to your package or your software's website, finding which is the version, is it 32-bit or 64-bit that you need to install on your system, that is all taken care for you by the package manager. In the same way, we have this extension of kubectl, which is managed using a package manager, which is called as Krew. So let's go into the website or the project where this Krew is hosted and see how do we get started. First of all, we can install Krew using the default package managers for the operating system that you're using. So you can go and look at this page called crew.6.k8s.io, which talks about what is Krew, what is the plugin manager for kubectl command line tool, and how do we get started. So it helps us to discover the various plugins, install them, and manage them. So anytime there is an update to the plugins, we can also upgrade those plugin versions. Instead of going to the GitHub repo or anywhere the plugin is hosted, we can use Krew to manage those plugins for us. And as of this recording, there are 151 plugins which are managed or distributed via Krew. So Krew works across the platform, so it also gives the providers or the creators of these kubectl plugins a way to distribute their plugins across different platforms like macOS, Linux, Windows. So you can go through this page how to get started. There is a quick start, there is a user guide and developer guide as well. There is also the installation. How do we get started? So let's go back to home, and let's go to quick start. And if we look at the first step in the install and setup Krew, this is where it will give us the instructions for how to set up new installation of Krew for different operating systems, starting with macOS. If you're using a shell or a emulator like Bash, ZSS, or Fish, we have different ways in which we can install. If you're using Homebrew, then Homebrew can be used to install Krew. I'm on Windows, so the steps are slightly manual. There is no package manager for Windows, or there is no package available via Chocolatey or Winget at this point in time. So what I did is I have this GitHub repo where I do the automation of my machine setup, and this is called as the Windows Dev Playbook. There is a markdown file in there called krewsetup.md, If you are interested, you can follow the steps here. This is also a way I keep myself in a way to automate the system. So what I've done here is to download the file from the releases, the latest version of Krew, copy it into a folder called C tools, where I store all the development tools or these utilities that I use for my Windows machine. And then I need to run this crew install crew command to set up the installation of Krew. And then we also need to add it to the path variable so that it's available in our terminal, and I can use the Krew extension to manage the different plugins. So here I'm using a PowerShell script to set up the environment variable and add it to the path of my machine. So once this is done, I can go to the terminal, whichever one I'm comfortable with. So I'm using Windows Terminal here, which is my favorite uh, command line utility. So here I can say kubectl crew, and I can use the help subcommand to know what are the different commands available as part of the crew plugin manager. And this can be invoked using all these commands. So the first one, obviously, which I used is the help. Understand which commands are supported or available as part of this version of Krew. So there is the index command, there is info, install, list, search, uninstall, update, upgrade, and version commands. So let's look at which are the uh, plugins which are available. So we can use the search command for this, and I will use the alias for kubectl, which is k, and then Krew, and then I want to search all the plugins available. So I can use this k-crew search or kubectl crew search command to search for all the plugins which are published and available at the index. So here you can see a list of plugins which are published and distributed via Krew, and some of them are not available. So if the plugin is not available for your particular operating system, you will see this message saying unavailable on Windows, because I'm on Windows right now. But let's say there is a plugin which is not available on Linux or macOS, you will see a message like this, so that you are aware that a particular plugin is not available for your OS. And yes or no indicates that whether this plugin has been installed right now on my system or not. So let's clear this and go and look for all those plugins which have been installed on my system. So kubectl crew, and if I do list, it will give me the list of plugins which have been installed already. And sorry about the typo. So kubectl crew list, and in the output you can see that I've got about 15 to 20 different plugins installed here, and I'll get the name of the plugin and the version of that plugin. So I have change NS, config cleanup, cost, deprecations, doctor, get all, and the other plugins already installed. So I can get the information about these plugins. So there are two ways in which I can find out more. So let's say I want to look at doctor as an example. So I can say kubectl crew doctor, and then I can use the help command related to that particular plugin to get more info about that. This will give us the standard set of commands supported by this. Sorry, it's not Krew. It's just kubectl and then the plugin name instead of Krew. So I can say kubectl, then the name of the plugin, and help doctor in this case, and h. Let's go and trigger that command again, kubectl doctor help, and this one will give us all the sub commands or the help for the kubectl doctor plugin. Okay, looks like there is some problem with the doctor plugin. Let's look at some other plugin here. So uh, kubectl to list. Let me use the short form because every time I try to type kubectl, I misspell it. So k list. Let's look at the images and see if it works. K images and -h. So we can see that it gives us the usage, how this has to be used, kubectl images, then the name of the pod name in regex format, and then the flags. So the flags are listed here, like -a for all namespaces. Then we can provide column names for specific columns that we want to see in the output, like the namespace, pod name, container name, etc. And then we can also provide additional flags in terms of the kind of output we want, the namespace, kubeconfig, and things like that. So this is one way. The other way in which we can find out more about the plugin is we can use the info command. So if I go back and if I look at the kubectl Krew's help command, we will find that there is a info subcommand for Krew. And if I give it the plugin name, it will give us the information about that particular plugin. So let's look at the same plugin that we looked at just now. So if I go back, let's see which was the plugin we had a look. Images. So let's get the info on this. So K to info, and if I give the plugin name images, I would get the information about the images plugin. So we can see that the name of this particular plugin is images, where is the URI where this plugin's source code is hosted, what is the current version, what is the home page on GitHub, and a short description of that. The third way in which we can find out more about the plugins is using the GitHub page. So if we go to the available plugins on the kubectl Krew plugin page or the home page of Krew, there is the plugin section where it will list down again all those plugins that we saw in the output of Krew search. So these are the same plugins which are listed in that output on the command line, and we can then individually go and look at the details of that. So let's go and look at the same one which we just looked at in the command line just now, and that one was the images. So let's go back and search for the images plugin. And on this GitHub repository, we will find how to use this plugin, starting with how to install it. So you can see the steps of installing. So it is similar to what I was showing just now. Kubectl Krew install and the name of the plugin, which is images in this case. Once it is installed, we will see this kind of output, which I'll show you by installing one of the plugin which I don't have on my system locally. Then the usage is we can find by running this kubectl images command help, and then also use the sub commands. So let's go and run this command and see the output of that. So far we saw how to search for the plugins, how to find help about the plugin. Now let's use this images plugin and see how it helps to extend the usage of kubectl. So K for kubectl, images, and if I just run without any parameters, let's see what happens. So we can see that there is one namespace here, the default namespace. There are three pods running, three containers for those three pods, and there are two different images used for creating those pods. The pod name is rbac-view, and the second one is rbac-view producer deployment with two replicas. The container name is rbac-view and TechTalks producer in this case. And then the container image which is used is for the rbac-view, it's coming from Bitnami Docker.io. And for the TechTalks producer, it's coming from my private container registry, which is the Azure Container Registry. And this is the TechTalks producer with the tag rbac-view GitHub 5.0. So this is for the K images. Now let's look at some of the other helpful plugins. So let me again list down all the plugins that I have installed, and I'll show you one or two which I find useful. So K through list. There are few plugins which are related to the pods, like the pod dive, pod inspect, pod lens. So let's look at the pod lens in this case, which gives us the insights into the pods that are running on our cluster. So to look at pod lens, K pod lens, and let's run without any parameters or any sub command. And it's asking us to select the pod. So there are three pods running right now: rbac-view, rbac-view producer deployment, and the two versions of that, or two replicas of that. And as I move up and down using the arrow keys, you can see the info below, it's changing. So currently I'm looking at the middle pod, rbac-view producer, ending with gbz bl. And this is in the default namespace. It's running on this node here, node pool 1. Current status is running, and the IP for the pod is ending with 0.7. Now, if I move on to the last pod, so the third pod, you can see that the IP is changing, and also the node where it is running is changing. And same way, the rbac-view pod. And if I select the pod, so that was like the summary of the pod. If I select one of those pods, it will give us the insights about that selected pod. And we can see here that for the rbac-view, it gives us like a tree view in terms of what is the namespace, which is default in this case, how is the pod managed. This is managed through a stateful set, which node it's running, what is the name of the pod, what is the container inside that pod which is running, the persistent volume claim which is associated with this pod, the config map, as well as secret. And in terms of replicas, it also shows us the running status and the events related to that replica. And in terms of the related resources, we can then find the details about things like stateful set, the service which is exposed on top of this pod, and the ports which are exposed via that service, then the headless service, and we also find the PVC, persistent volume claim, and the config map and secret related to that pod. So if you have worked with kubectl in the past, you know that getting this kind of information is not so easy. Here we are getting the complete hierarchy or all the related dependencies of a pod. Try doing this without having this the pod info or pod insights plugin enabled. And I can tell you it will take us long time to go through each of these resources, find out details about them, and then go and look for the additional information. Now let's go and look at a couple of other uh, plugins as well. So we looked at just now the pod info or pod lens plugin. Let's look at one more before we close this or before we look at how to install. So Krew list, and I will take again one more example of the plugin related to pod information or one which gives details about the pod. So we looked at pod lens. Let's look at pod inspect and pod dive as well. So K pod dive, and this one requires the name of the pod. So I'm giving, uh, I should have given that rbac-view pod name. Let's see what happens here. We should get a message saying how to use this. So usage, because I didn't give all the required parameters, you can see how this pod dive plugin works. So it asks for the name of the pod and then the flags. So here, uh, the example is like kubectl pod dive, then was stored. So let's go and look at one of the pod. Again, RabbitMQ0 is the pod which is running and it's the easiest one to type. So let me try that pod dive. And if I give RabbitMQ0, so in this case, again, we get a similar view in terms of the tree, like what is the namespace, what is the type associated with this, or what is the type managing this pod, what is the workload, how many replicas are running, if there are any restarts related to this container, and in terms of siblings, it is the pods which are running on the same node. So we can see that there is a KEDA operator pod running, the Azure IP mask agent is running, kubeproxy is also running on this. So that was the pod dive. Let's look at the third one, the crew list. So we have looked at pod lens and pod dive. Let's look at pod inspect. So K pod inspect or kubectl pod inspect. And similar to the pod dive, if we require any additional parameters, it would be listed in terms of the usage. But here we see that we don't need any additional parameters. So when we do the pod inspect, it will give us the pod status for all the running pods. Again, the view is different, but the information is similar to what we saw in the output of other two plugins as well. So in this case, it gives like a list and a table in terms of the pod, which namespace it's running, what's the name of the pod, the node where it is running, containers, and this information is provided in a table format instead of like a list or JSON output. Now let's see how do we install a new plugin. So let's go and find out one of the plugin which is not installed currently. So I will do a Krew search to find out one of the plugin which is supported on Windows operating system and which is not installed on my system, right? So here we have one plugin which is related to the role-based access control for managing the permissions, and it says who can. That is one which is not installed. The other plugin, if we look, is there is one called sort manifest, split YAML. Uh, rbac-view. I think this one looks interesting. So it will show the role-based access control permissions. So let's install this one, the rbac-view. So to install rbac-view, I need to run kubectl or k crew install, and then the name of the plugin, rbac-view. So you can see that it has updated my local copy of the plugin index. This is where all those plugins which are published and managed by a Krew are published or stored. Then it goes and installs the plugin, and it tells me how to run this. So I can run kubectl rbac-view, and it will open a browser with the HTML view of my permissions. So let's do that. Okay, rbac-view. So it's serving this on localhost 8800. Let's go and see that in our browser if we are able to access it. And here we can see the output of that plugin, the rbac-view. It's still trying to retrieve this from Kubernetes. And you can see the different roles which are there installed, the rbac roles installed on my Kubernetes cluster, and which role has got which permissions. So these are all the different kinds of objects and the permissions, who has access to that and what kind of permission is available. So get, list, then write or watch, then batch and update. These are the different permissions which are allowed, and based on the type of role, we can see that different subjects or different users or accounts, they have got different permissions. And now if I want to, let's go back, let's stop this which was being served from that page. Let's go and remove one of the plugin, the one which I might not be using very actively. So let's list all the plugins first and then remove one of them. So Krew list. Let's say I want to remove this Popeye plugin. So I can run Krew uninstall and then the name of the plugin, which is Popeye. So we can see here that the plugin has been uninstalled. Now, if I list the plugins again, I should not find the Popeye plugin listed. So Krew list, and we see that Popeye has disappeared from this list. The last part which I want to show is how to upgrade. So let's clear the screen and Krew I can upgrade in two ways. I can just run the Krew upgrade command, and let's look at the help for this command or the sub command. If I run upgrade without providing the list of plugins, then it will upgrade all those plugins which have an update available. It will first renew the index of the plugins and then upgrade all of them. If I provide the name of a specific plugin, instead of upgrading all, it will upgrade a specific plugin. So let me go and upgrade all the plugins. Maybe there are some plugins which are upgraded or which have an update available. So Krew upgrade, and it should go and upgrade all the eligible plugins. So you can see that this change.ns plugin had some update available. So it has skipped the update because it doesn't have any upgrade in this case. So wherever it finds that the current version is matching the updated version, it will give us this message that is already on the newest versions. But wherever it is possible to update, it will update. So in this case, you can see that the pod length has been upgraded because there was an update available. Same thing for pre-flight and for starboard as well. So with that, I think I've covered all the parts related to the plugins management for kubectl. We started with how do we look for plugins using search? How do we look for the information for a specific plugin using info? How we can find out what parameters are required using plugin name and -h or -help to get more inputs on the parameters and the flags that are required. Then we looked at how to use a plugin and then also install, uninstall. I didn't show the uninstall, but yeah, we did cover uninstall as well. Sorry. And then how to upgrade. So I hope you find this useful. In case you want to develop your own plugin, maybe you're quite familiar with the way Kubernetes works and you know how to build the plugins, then you can publish your own plugin itself, which will help others to use extended features of kubectl. If you already have something which is working well and you can convert that into a plugin, you can deploy or you can share that, you can publish that using Krew. And this is where I find this YouTube channel very useful. This is by the engineer who is currently maintaining the Krew plugin itself or the Krew project itself. And if you look at all these videos, he talks about how do you build plugins, how do you maintain plugins, and what are the best practices and things like that. So I hope you find this useful. If you like this video, please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and share it with your friends. Thank you. Thanks for watching this video.